But a small retailer from Seattle changed that and later became the biggest coffee house chain in the world, Starbucks. While the company was founded by three friends, it wasn't them who transformed Starbucks into a $100 billion company. It was an outsider, a poor kid from Brooklyn who had just graduated from high school the year that Starbucks was born. In 1962, Gordon Bowker was a student at the University of San Francisco and was traveling across Europe. At a cafe in Rome, he ordered a cappuccino. Immediately, he was taken back by the taste. It was different, amazing, and unforgettable. At the time, most Americans drank instant coffee at home or overcooked coffee in diners. When he returned to the US, he dropped out of USF and moved back to his hometown, Seattle. To feed his habit, he would drive from Seattle to Vancouver, BC to visit Murchie's, a shop that sold and roasted coffee beans. In 1970, Gordon was on his way home from a coffee run and came up with the idea of opening up a shop in Seattle. He told his two friends, Jerry Baldwin and Steve Siegel, about the idea. The three of them decided to go into business together and visited Peet's Coffee in Berkeley. It was owned by Alfred Peet, the son of an Amsterdam coffee trader. Alfred roasted his coffee dark, the European way, because it brought out the full flavors of the beans. Within weeks, Alfred taught Gordon, Jerry, and Steve how to run the business and roast coffee the European way. The same year, Howard Schultz just graduated high school and was enrolling in Northern Michigan University. He was the first person in his family to go to college through an athletic scholarship. During his first season, he got injured and had to quit football. To pay for school, he took out loans, worked as a bartender, and sometimes sold his blood. After graduating from college, he got a job in Xerox's sales training program and became a successful salesman. But eventually, he started to feel restless and wanted something more challenging. So he ended up working for Hammerplast, a Swedish company that sold kitchen equipment and housewares. He worked his way up to becoming a vice president and general manager. He was given a $75,000 salary, a company car, an expense account, and unlimited travel. Still, he felt like something was missing. In 1981, Howard noticed a small retailer placing unusually large orders for a drip coffee maker, Starbucks. Starbucks had only 4 stores then, yet it was buying products in quantities larger than Macy's, one of the world's largest department stores. He had never been to Seattle before, but decided to visit to see what was going on at their original store in Pike Place Market. They only sold coffee beans, but sometimes offered tasting samples. Howard tried a sample and was hooked. He felt like he discovered a whole new continent. On his plane ride back to New York, he couldn't stop thinking about Starbucks and described it as a shining jewel. So he reached out to Jerry and asked if there was any way that it could fit into Starbucks. While the idea appealed to Jerry, his partners were nervous about bringing in a high-powered New Yorker. Some days, Howard couldn't even believe he was entertaining the idea. His mother would say, "You're doing well. You have a future. Don't give it up for a small company nobody's ever heard of." After 1 year, Jerry and Gordon invited Howard to San Francisco to meet their silent partner, Steve Donovan. Howard was convinced that he would fly back to New York with an offer in his hand. He was wrong. Jerry's partner didn't want to hire him because it was too risky. But he couldn't accept no as an answer and called Jerry. He told him that he was making a terrible mistake and that the destiny of Starbucks was at stake. The next day, Jerry called him and told him he got the job and asked when he could come to Seattle. In his memoir, he wrote, "No great achievement happens by luck." In 1983, Howard had been at Starbucks for a year and was sent to Milan to attend an international houseware show. During his walk to the show, he noticed several espresso bars and was fascinated by the ritual and romance. As he watched, he had a revelation. Starbucks sold great coffee beans, but they didn't serve coffee by the cup. In his memoir, he wrote, "They treated coffee as produce, something to be bagged and sent home with the groceries. They stayed one big step from the heart and soul of what coffee has meant throughout the centuries." One day, Howard took a train to Verona and mimicked someone's coffee order, a cafe latte. He described it as the perfect balance between steamed milk and coffee. No one had ever mentioned this drink to him before. He thought to himself, "No one in America knows about this. I've got to take it back with me." When Howard returned to Seattle and told his bosses about his revelation, they saw him as an overexcited marketing director. They argued that Starbucks was a retailer, not a restaurant or a bar. He later learned that the reason why his idea didn't appeal at the time, Jerry was considering an opportunity that excited him more. In 1984, Starbucks bought Peet's. The acquisition left them deeply in debt and deprived them of trying out new ideas. It took Howard nearly a year to convince Jerry to test the idea of serving espresso. He didn't consider it a high priority, but agreed to do it at the opening of Starbucks' 6th store in downtown Seattle. Even though business grew, Jerry felt the success of that store was wrong and said that they were too deeply in debt to continue. Howard was depressed for months and felt torn between his loyalty to Starbucks and his vision for Italian espresso bars. Around that time, Howard went to a downtown athletic club to play basketball, where he was paired with a lawyer named Scott Greenberg. He occasionally met Scott for beers and over time shared some of his frustrations. When he told Scott he was thinking of going independent, Scott said he thought investors might be interested. After talking about his idea with Scott and his partner Sherry, he thought to himself, "This is my moment. If I don't seize the opportunity, if I don't step out of my comfort zone and risk it all, if I let too much time tick on, my moment will pass." In 1985, he finally made the move and left Starbucks to start his own company, Il Giornale, the Italian word for newspaper. When he was planning on how to approach investors to raise money for his company, Jerry surprised him. He called him into his office and offered to invest $150,000 of Starbucks' money. Howard was off to a great start. With Jerry and Gordon's support, he thought he could attract all the money he needed within 6 months. Howard and Gordon even flew to Italy to research coffee bars and meet with Fami, a producer of espresso machines in Milan. He expected to return to Seattle with a $1 million investment. But Fami turned him down. They insisted that Americans could never enjoy espresso the way Italians do. By January 1986, Howard raised the initial seed capital that he needed, secured a lease, and started building the first store. He spent every single minute of his day asking for money, racing from one meeting to another. He told investors that his plan was to reinvent a commodity. At the time, Nike was the only other company that did something comparable. In his memoir, he wrote, "Sneakers were certainly a commodity, cheap and standard and practical and generally not very good. Nike's strategy was first to design world-class running shoes and then create an atmosphere of top-flight athletic performance and witty irreverence around them. Many of the investors that he approached saw high-tech as a more attractive industry to invest in and bluntly told him he was selling a crazy idea. Il Giornale? You can't pronounce that name. How could you leave Starbucks? What a stupid move. Why on earth do you think this is going to work? Americans are never going to spend $1.50 for coffee." Over a year, Howard spoke to 242 people, and 217 of them said no. It was a very humbling time for him. In April 1986, Howard finally opened the first Il Giornale store. In the beginning, they made lots of mistakes by recreating an authentic style coffee bar. They only played Italian opera, the baristas wore white shirts and bow ties, and there was no seating area. It wasn't appropriate for Seattle, and people started complaining. So, they varied the music, added chairs, and offered takeout cups. While sales exceeded expectations, there were times he wasn't sure if he could meet payroll or pay the rent. Months later, Howard decided to tap into 3 of Seattle's most prominent leaders: Jack Ben Arroyo, Herman Sarkowski, and Sam Strong. After meeting with Herman's son, Steve, Herman agreed to let Howard make a presentation to the 3 of them. While they made stiff demands, a lower price, options, board seats, they ended up investing $750,000 as a group. In 1987, Howard's luck got even better. Jerry and Gordon decided to sell Starbucks. To buy Starbucks, Howard would need to find $3.8 million. His investors were impressed with the progress that Il Giornale made within a short time, so he was confident that some of them would invest more money. But one day, it nearly fell apart. Howard almost lost Starbucks before he ever had it. One of his investors, a business leader in Seattle, was planning to buy Starbucks. He was sure that this man would reduce him from a major shareholder to an employee, and that he would unfairly treat some of his early investors. So Howard and Scott prepared a strategy and arranged to meet with the investor. Scott's senior partner and Microsoft founder Bill Gates agreed to go with him. The investor told Howard that if he didn't take his deal, he'd never work again in Seattle, will never raise another dollar, and will be dog meat. When the meeting ended, Howard cried in the lobby. Bill tried to reassure him that everything would turn out all right, but was shocked by the outburst. 2 days later, Howard met with other investors and presented a proposal. Every investor in Il Giornale would have a chance to invest in Starbucks. They saw that his plan would be fair to them and admired his integrity for refusing to agree to a plan that benefited big investors at the expense of smaller ones. Within weeks, Howard managed to raise $3.8 million he needed, and on August 18th of 1987, the modern Starbucks was born.